Hi, this is Mike at DOT Compliance Help. I'm going to go over another NTSB report and see what kind of conclusions we might draw. As always, I don't mean to say to any motor carrier, this is what you should learn from this NTSB report. I'm just going to show you a way that I'm walking through it, and I'm going to show you the conclusions that I've come to. But the most important lesson I'd like for you all to take away from this is you can learn a lot from an NTSB report, and from what you can learn, I think you can improve your decision-making process moving forward. For starters, this is another accident where a small incident took place and the highway's backed up, and some driver who wasn't performing properly, not making good safety management decisions, approached this backed up traffic and just didn't slow down or stop. I've already covered two instances like that, but I'll show you in a minute that we're kind of doing something a little bit different with this one. Here's the identifying information, which tells you what date it happened and where in the accident report and how long it took. And there's one snapshot. I think that's the only picture we have here of the incident. Bottom line up front, like I said, this is one of those things where I think the NTSB is coming up with this phrase, run up on traffic. I think that's how they're going to classify it. The NTSB's suggestions are generally to the state DOT. In this instance, or in many instances, the NTSB has called for some dynamic signs, but in this case, they had this sign absolutely in giant flashing letters an hour before the wreck that says freeway closed 15 miles ahead. So if the driver's completely asleep at the wheel, I mean, those signs are apparently not going to fix the problem. So right off the bat, it seems to be a driver problem. But remember, it's never really operator error. It's always systems error. Crash summary right quick. As I mentioned, minor incident, traffic backed up. This cat comes along. He's driving 70 miles an hour. He doesn't slow down. He doesn't change lanes. He killed 4 people. Now, one of the first things I saw when I'm looking at this is it seems to be a small company, and sometimes the smaller companies are not the ones that have good safety management controls. But there's no lead pipe guarantee about that. Sometimes big companies mess up, and sometimes smaller companies do a good job. Just to point out that I'm not harping on the same exact scenario again and again. The first two incidents, as you see, the first two incidents that I highlighted had to do with these run-up collisions. But the first one, it only happened a couple months ago, and we don't have anything from the NTSB yet. And the second one, these were always meant to be paired. This was one with an NTSB report, and there was a lot of information there, but the conclusions we're coming to today are a little bit different. And then these other 4 instances that we've discussed since then are obviously different. And I'm trying to give you all some variety. Contributing factor for severity. First of all, the driver smashed into a bunch of people. No surprise, the NTSB said the driver was clearly asleep at the wheel. And he was also suffering from undiagnosed sleep apnea. And this is going to be based on some information we're going to delve into in a little bit more detail. And I like to use this 5 why thing, and I feel like I always come up with the same conclusion, but you can do it yourself, and maybe you'll come up with different conclusions. But why did the driver not stop? Because he was asleep. Why was he asleep? He hadn't had enough sleep, and he had sleep apnea, which hadn't been diagnosed. Well, that depends on your definition of diagnosis. Why did the motor carrier dispatch a driver who was clearly not well rested and suffering from sleep apnea? Because the motor carrier didn't have good safety management systems. Why does a motor carrier why does the motor carrier not have good safety controls? Because the DOT doesn't do a good job of getting them out of the business. Why does the DOT not enforce the standard? I think because of a public desire for cheap freight. The FMCSA had full authority to hire 3 times as many investigators 25 years ago, and they didn't. I don't know what's going to have to change. Just to give you an idea how thorough the NTSB is, you can read this, but here's a comment. They interviewed the wife. I've always said this about the NTSB. if there's the slightest chance that you're sleepy, I'm referring to the fatality driver. If the driver is either sleepy um, or impaired, they'll interview your children and they'll interview the neighbors and they'll interview the neighbors' children. They will get to the bottom of it. They will find out what you've been doing. And I always tell people you should tell your drivers that. So here's your brief crash description. I apologize for the typo. I just saw it. The guy's going 70 miles an hour, and there's a guy right behind him with the dash cam in place that shows he took no evasive action, didn't steer or brake. He plowed straight into a bunch of cars. And like I said, we killed 4 people and put 6 more in hospital. Here's a little bit more detail, just pretty much what we just said. He hit this car, and that car hit another car, and then he hit another car, and there's 2 other commercial vehicles involved. The motor carrier factor. The NTSB always looks at the motor carrier. I don't know. I say I shouldn't. I usually don't point fingers at people because I'm afraid they might get offended or, send somebody to shoot me or sue me or something. But I've always heard you can't be sued for telling the truth. There's the company right there. Their SM history today looks like they have, at best, a spotty record. Recent violations, a lot. Somebody using a cell phone. These are in the last 2 years. Speed going over 15 miles, more than 15 miles over the posted speed. There's 3 of those. Recent issues with driver qualification. This does not look like the motor carrier that I would want to hire if I was a shipper that had a load to deliver. The NTSB goes on and says they don't use PSP reports. Now, that's not mandatory. The motor carrier says they've got a safety consulting company doing mock audits every quarter. First of all, I've never heard of anybody doing mock audits once each quarter. Secondly, if they're having quarterly mock audits, either the person that's doing the mock audit doesn't know what they're doing, or they're simply not doing anything that's suggested, because this bears all the earmarks of a company that's not doing any of the things they're supposed to be doing well. And the DOT's been all over them like a bug on a June bug. They did a compliance review in 2008. They did one in 2011. They gave them a proposed unsat each time. They did a compliance review in 2018, gave them a conditional. And after the fatality in 2020, they had another compliance review, and they're still in business. And they still have a high rate of occurrence of unsafe driving violations. The NTSB investigator says, has there been any policy changes? And the carrier says, yes, we have this PowerPoint presentation we review with our drivers. And they submitted this PowerPoint presentation to the NTSB. I looked at it, and it's garbage. It doesn't even relate to commercial vehicle operators. So it doesn't appear that the motor carrier is doing anything different. Now, usually I try to focus my effort on this is what was happening leading up to the crash, but I just can't help commenting that this motor carrier appears to be doing the same things today that they were doing leading up to the crash. I've never seen a motor carrier have this, well, very seldom, have this many compliance reviews. They had one in 2011, one in 2016, one in 2018. This is before the fatality, and then this course is after the fatality. This is the list of violations from the post-crash compliance review. That could be almost anything. Records of duty status not in right form. False records of duty status. There's an issue here with a medical examiner certificate. Not doing the pre-employment queries. They didn't close the loop on the 3 years job history. The FMCSA is usually really hard on carriers for doing that, but somehow or other, these guys are still in business. Too many moving violations. And here's 2 separate violations for not verifying job history. As a result of the post-crash compliance review, some recommendations were made. This is really weak. Developing a policy, you're supposed to do that. You're supposed to do this. You're supposed to do this. These are all routine things that people are supposed to be doing every day. But after 6 compliance reviews in 10 years, and then a multiple fatality, and now they're doing a compliance review after fatality, that's the best they can do. So I'm not really impressed with the FMCSA's performance in this area. And they got a conditional rating from the post, and this has been 6 years ago. So here's some illustrations from that 17 slide. And everything I'm telling you, I mean, I'm not showing you anything that's a secret. This is all in the NTSB report, and I've given you the NTSB report number. So if you want to see this 17 slide presentation, you can see it. It's right there in the NTSB report, and it's the stupidest thing I've seen. And they're referring to it as a defensive driving slash motivational driving training presentation. It's total garbage. Look at the face on that chauffeur. I mean, it has nothing to do with driving commercial vehicles. That's a cute picture. I sort of like that. This kind of ticks me off. I mean, that makes me think that they got some garbage training presentation that was intended for taxi drivers. That's not a picture of a guy driving a truck. Nothing about it talked about commercial vehicle operations. Driver factors. Let's talk about the specific driver. According to his application, he had at least 8. Now, this is from the NTSB, and they make it sound like this is a big deal. There's at least 8 jobs since he got a CDL, but I'm going to ignore part of that. These are the jobs he's had in the last 10 years, and this is not necessarily excessive. But you can see in his history here, he's worked for some very reputable companies, and now he's working for a company with a very questionable history. That should tell you a lot about the driver. So if you're a small company and you can't afford to pay a lot, and some cat comes in applying for a job, and he used to work for one of the best companies in the country, you got to ask yourself, why does he want to work for me? Yeah, this company has over 1,000 trucks and a bad out-of-service record. And that's based on today's information. And this little company has almost as bad out-of-service rate. This is about the specific driver. This talks about his records of duty status. I mean, his hours of service in the last 6 days leading up to the crash. I mean, it looks like he's heavily scheduled, but it doesn't look like what they're doing here is illegal. And of course, he had a 34-hour restart here, apparently. I mean, usually if they're off 24 hours, there's an additional 6 hours on one end or the other. Now, this is where it really gets interesting. This guy had 2 physicals in the same year. The first one, he's 55 years old. He weighs 319 pounds. So that tells me right there. He's getting up in years and he's morbidly obese. But he says he has no medication. He doesn't have any active medical conditions. And he answered no to all the driver health. I tell people this every day. Drivers always answer no to all those health history questions. Don't have any issues with any of this stuff, which in retrospect turns out to be a big fat lie. But remember, it's never really an operator error. It's always the system's error. As a motor carrier, I'll show you in just a second. We'll come back to this. I'm just gonna leave that, put a pin in that. So he answered no to this question. Have you ever got a DOT card that was less than 2 years? The ME notes, he said he used to take medicine for diabetes and high blood pressure, but he denied ongoing use. The physical exam was fairly unremarkable, although he did note that he meets and exceeds the screening criteria for sleep apnea screening. So he gave him a DOT card that's only good for 3 months. 3 months later, he goes to a different doctor. This is something you should not allow as a motor carrier. Instead of letting a guy shop around for doctors, you should send him to your medical examiner. Maybe a good medical examiner could have headed this guy off at the pass. Now he's even fatter. He's almost as fat as I am right now. And again, he says he's not taking any medication, and he has no active medical condition, and he answered no to all these questions. And he also says he's never had a sleep apnea test, even though the other medical examiner said you need to get a sleep apnea test. And of course, he did answer yes to this question. He has had a DOT card that was less than 2 years. And he said he smokes a pack a day. Does that sound like a guy that hasn't had to go to the doctor for any reason for a long time? At this point, they might have picked up on something. If the medical examiner says he needs to be checked for sleep apnea, I've been telling people this for years. You make sure they get checked for sleep apnea. Don't just let him go to a different medical examiner 3 months later. At this point, I'd say he was not qualified, just for that reason alone, because the one medical examiner says you should be screened for sleep apnea, and he was never screened for sleep apnea. The second medical examiner seems to have been thorough in a way. His blood pressure was way too high. He shows up positive for blood and sugar in the urine. And he didn't check the body mass index. So, I mean, how the second medical examiner didn't flag him for sleep apnea is beyond me. Does this really sound like a 55-year-old guy with no ongoing medical issues who says he didn't need to see a doctor for anything in the last 10 years? So the second medical examiner gave him a DOT card that's good for a year and specified he has diabetes, high blood pressure, and blood in the urine. Then he sent a form to the driver's doctor requesting some information about whether or not he can drive a commercial vehicle because he's got abnormal high blood pressure and blood in the urine. The form letter could have asked about sleep apnea, but he left that blank. The medical examiner's records included 2 letters from the primary care doctor. In March, the primary care doctor says the issue is under control. Notice he doesn't say the guy hasn't been treated for anything for the longest time, because that's simply not the case. And then a month later, he says he came in, he's got high blood pressure, but he says it's well controlled. The letter says they repeated the urine test and it's normal, indicating blood in the urine has been resolved, which, I mean, who knows what that means? You don't see blood in the urine that often. Now, this is from the primary care doctor. No concerns. Physical exam unremarkable other than severe obesity. Prescriptions for 3 oral medications, metformin, all this stuff. I mean, some of this stuff I'm not even going to try to pronounce. Some of this stuff I'm taking. I'm not applying for a job as a commercial vehicle, and I'm not an athlete. Just started taking this. He's been taking this. And probably, apparently he had some real serious car wreck 3 years ago. Here's a big one, gabapentin. He's just started taking this. I mean, I'm not a doctor, but I have an internet. When you first start taking this stuff, you don't drive, not for a while, not until you're confident that you can handle it. And I shouldn't sound flippant about that, because it appears, just from everything I've studied today, and I put several hours into this, I think this stuff is what caused this fatality crash. If I was the plaintiff's attorney, I'd be going after everybody, including the people that make that medicine. But the medicine is clearly labeled, and he didn't follow the instructions. And so what was the real root cause again? I mean, it's really easy to point the finger at the driver, and that's the first thing everybody does. But the motor carrier dispatched the guy. So the real root cause is poor driver selection. First of all, don't ever let the driver pick a doctor. You send him to a medical examiner that you choose. If he gets a DOT card that says it's good for 3 months only, he needs to get evaluated for sleep apnea, make sure he gets evaluated for sleep apnea. If he gets a second physical in 3 months, make sure he goes to the same medical examiner. The second guy didn't give him a restricted license based on sleep apnea, but the motor carrier already knows. The first ME said, have him checked for sleep apnea. That should have made him disqualified right there. But the second medical examiner, in his defense, pointed out some really concerning health issues. Honestly, it looks to me like the current system is not doing what it's meant to do. There's ample evidence that this motor carrier shouldn't be dispatching commercial vehicles, but they're still in business, and they're still doing very poorly. I mean, anybody with a computer can just look up their DOT number and see that they're absolutely a menace on the road. Now that I know the name of the motor carrier, if I see one of their trucks in traffic, I'll give them some extra room. The NTSB should call out the FMCSA. But again, this is beyond your control. As a motor carrier, this whole story is just a really strong illustration of the fact you should have a medical examiner that you choose. Don't let drivers go doctor shopping. Like this cat went to 2 different doctors in 3 months. Final comment, this gabapentin might have, I mean, all you got to do is read the label warning on gabapentin. And again, I'm not a doctor, but I got an internet, and it's right there. And of course, the driver is a big liar because he kept saying he wasn't taking any medicine, and he's taken more medicine than some, you know, some people in nursing homes, including that one that says, "Don't be taking this if you're operating heavy equipment, at least not until you're confident that you know how it's gonna affect you." I guess that's all I got to say about this one today. I hope you all have a safe day and stay in touch. And of course, if you have any questions or comments, please post them below. Thanks and have a good day.